Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Efrain Escobedo. I'm Vice President of Education and Immigration at the California Community Foundation. But most importantly, I'm a very proud board member of Hispanics and Philanthropy. And I want to just thank you all for joining us these past couple of days and bringing all of your energy, insight, both as participants and as speakers as well. And this afternoon's panel will be no exception. I want to take a few seconds to thank Ana Mari and the HIP staff for their leadership, but more importantly, their swift action in such an important and trying time in our country and globally as well, and ensuring that this space embraces that moment and helps to lead the way as we look for answers, but more importantly, as we act towards change. Before we get started, I'd like to make a couple of quick reminders. So first, immediately following this plenary, please join us for some time with comedian Angela Johnson Reyes in Chismecito Caliente, and at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, 3:30 p.m. Pacific at our Cumbiaton Solidarity Hour with DJ Sizzle, which will be available here on the conference site and on Instagram Live. So we hope that after a day of intense conversations and a brief moment to reflect, that you'll join us for some laughs and some good cumbiaton at our Solidarity Hour. Now, I was 17 in 1992 during the LA civil unrest, and I was 19 when California's anti-immigrant Proposition 187 was passed. 20 years later, the persistent violence against our Black brothers and sisters, anti-immigrant policies of family separation and exclusion in the CARES Act serve only to uplift the unfinished business of dismantling structural racism in our society, and which impedes real freedom in our society. We all feel the pain and outrage. As we move from protest, we reflect on our power. Where is it? How do we use it? How do we protect it? This conversation could not be more timely. Part of my job as moderator today for this discussion was to help frame the conversation. In light of the moments of this past week, however, I think we're called to uplift and center our discussion behind the voices of those most violently affected, our Black brothers and sisters. As one of my colleagues put it in very real talk, everyone these past few days has asked me or told me that they understand and feel the pain, but they can't, not like I can. If we're going to talk about the power and opportunity to achieve racial justice, I want to center this conversation behind the voice of a Black nationalist and freedom fighter whose words could not be more relevant today as they were back in 1964. And that is Malcolm X in his speech, The Ballot or the Bullet, where he said, "By ballot, I only mean freedom. The ballot is more important than the dollar. Can I prove it? Yes. Look in the UN. There are poor nations in the UN that those poor nations can get together with their voting power and keep the rich nations from making a move. They have one nation, one vote. Everyone has an equal vote. And when those brothers from Asia and Africa and the darker parts of this earth get together, their voting power is sufficient to hold Sam in check, or Russia in check, or some other section in the earth in check. So the ballot is most important. This is why I say it's the ballot or the bullet. It's the liberty or it's death. It's freedom for everybody or freedom for nobody. America today finds herself in a unique situation. This country can become involved in a revolution that won't take bloodshed. All she's got to do is give the Black man in this country everything that's due him, everything. Powerful and relevant words that should remind and urge us that unless our Latino vote is also a Black vote, there will be freedom for nobody. The same goes for our women's vote, our API vote, our youth vote, our progressive vote. With that, I'd like to introduce our distinguished guests for our conversation this afternoon. Joining me today is Tori Gavito, President of Way to Win and responsible for steering the vision and strategy of a powerful network of donors and strategies making a difference. Leticia Peguero, who is Vice President of Programs at the Nathan Cummings Foundation. She developed strategies grounded in principles of social justice, philanthropy, that are nimble, responsive, and yet reflective and integrated in our complex nature of social change. We have my former boss, Arturo Vargas, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials Educational Fund, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that strengthens American democracy by providing full participation of Latinos in civic life. Also joining us is Stephanie Valencia, who's a social entrepreneur and national leader of at the nexus of politics, technology, and leadership development. She's the co-founder of Equis Labs, an organization that is working to create a better understanding of the Latinx electorate, investing in innovative tactics and approaches to engage Latinx voters using digital, tech, and data tools. So with this distinguished panel, I'd like to dive into this conversation and continuing on the reflection of the moment that we come together in this afternoon. I'd like to start off by asking you, Leticia, if you could share, the Nathan Cummings Foundation has been a tremendous leader when it comes to advancing racial and economic justice. And as we find ourselves here today, I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about what you think is at stake in this election, but as we've witnessed over the past week with people rising up, how has that changed the stakes?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that beautiful opening. I felt I've been emotional all week and you touched my heart with the opening, so thank you. You know, I'm often asked the question, which I think relates wholeheartedly to what you're talking about, like what is philanthropy's role in this moment of change, right? As we're thinking about racial justice, as we're thinking about injustice, what is the role that philanthropic entities can play? And we are Hispanics in philanthropy, so it feels like ever so relevant to actually touch upon that just a little bit because of the small amount of money that actually goes to the Latino community, the Latinx community, but also to movement building, right? And so when we think about the transformation of this moment, the opportunity that this moment is giving us, as someone that works in the field, I'm oftentimes asked, right, as an insider, like what's at stake? And I think for me, and I hope for many of us that are listening, what's at stake is how do we courageously transform the master's tools, right? So philanthropy is been around since the beginning of time, and yet the philanthropic industrial complex is much newer, right? It's an American invention. And I really encourage us in this conversation of what's at stake in this election, but also in this moment of uprising, of the songs of the unheard, for us to think a little bit about, like, how do we transform the master's tools, right? Especially those of us that work in philanthropy, right? You and I and Tori, right? Thinking about what the importance of really turning philanthropy to work for the power of the people. That 2% number that we oftentimes quote that goes to the Latino community, what we're actually not asking is how much money of that 2% goes to building power, right? And so I really welcome us, and I welcome this conversation with my brothers and sisters on this panel to really think about, like, that 2%. It's terrible. It's a terrible percentage, but it's even smaller when we think about what it takes to courageously transform the status quo in this country and to courageously transform what's needed in this moment. Of uprising and hearing the songs of the stories that have been untold. So from my perspective and from Nathan Cummings' perspective, it's really about understanding the history of philanthropy, understanding our role, but also moving money really to the places and the people that are trying to change the status quo, that are trying to build power in the communities that are the Latino community, our Black brothers and sisters, right, that have been so historically marginalized. So I'd love for us to engage in a conversation really about, right, the time is now, but the time is now to courageously transform the master's tools, because that's what many of us in philanthropy are using.
Gracias, Leticia. And I'd like to quickly invite any of the panelists, if you want to share, building on Leticia's beautiful words, just even coming into this conversation, taking in the moment of the past week, sort of what feeling for you expresses what you're bringing into this conversation because of that. And any of you, not all of you have to.
I'd love to jump in, Efrain. You know, I think for me, the last week has really is, you know, kind of the core to ECI's role is to better understand who our electorate, you know, who the Latino community is in this country. And I think it's important to acknowledge that a quarter of Latinos identify as Afro-Latinx. So this isn't about us and them. We are one. And we have to fight together as one. And so I think as I've taken a step back to look at, one, what is it that we as the Latino community and as leaders in this community do to be stronger allies to the Black community in this moment in time and longer term, just to look at other ways that we can be stronger allies. I think two, looking at the role of how we in the Latino community and our culture and our language and tradition have potentially continued to propagate racism, colorism, and anti-Blackness, even just the language that we use and how we talk about it in our community. I think that means that we have to look inwardly and look at how we challenge those structures and conversations in our own families, in our own organizations, and in our community, and quite frankly, in our Spanish language media. Univision and Telemundo are really critical distribution points of information for our community, and we don't see the kind of diversity of voices that truly represent our community. I think there is one Afro-Latina anchor, Univision mainstream anchor, was historic, but we need more because we need to tell the full story of our community. And I think that what this moment has really brought for me is how can we be showing up better as a community and as leaders to be those better allies and better storytellers to change and again challenge the narratives that we've been taught for generations in our community.
Thank you, Stephanie. I saw both Arturo and Tori unmute. So Arturo and then Tori.
Thank you, Efrain. And I think one of the biggest challenges we'll have in this election is translating the kind of energy that we've seen in the streets into actual voting behavior and having people actually translate that energy into voting. And in many ways, and I don't have data yet to support what I'm about to say, but as you know from your work with Naleo, we have focused on that segment of the Latino potential electorate that doesn't even register to vote, doesn't vote. It tends to be almost half of the potential Latino electorate. And when we've done surveys and focus groups about why, more often than not, we hear about the sense of the futility of voting and how voting does not result in outcomes in their lives. And I think we have a moment right now to how do we connect with the protest that people are doing to actually then, let's get you to vote. Let's get you to march to the ballot box. Mm-hmm. And then there's this whole bucket of issues about what this particular election is going to look like in terms of voting procedures that are in fact institutionally erecting more barriers to the Latino vote.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that, Tori.
I just wanted to reflect quickly on this question of what is power. I think we have to be very clear about that word and its definition. In some ways, Arturo, thinking about what you said, just linking what you said and Stephanie and Leticia about this idea that like expressions of power can be protest, it can be ballot box, it can be both. And in some ways it's like, if it's one or the other, it's like asking someone who goes to the gym, how do you get on the treadmill instead of the elliptical? And we need to get people just to go to the gym. Once they're there, they're going to use all the machines. You know, it's like once you flip on the switch about wanting to be engaged, they're going to want to fill out a census, go find their vote by mail ballots. You know, they're going to want to engage. They want to hit the streets. And so it dawns on me that it's actually this opportunity right now, this multiracial opportunity where we're seeing Black power in the streets is actually an opportunity for us to also watch Latinx power bloom. So if you look historically at times when Latinx power has been the most acute, when we've been on the streets and in the ballot box, when we've been pushing contracts for better labor conditions and taking seats of power in halls, you know, halls of governing, it's when Black power movements are actually at their most robust. And so it's this idea of linking the movements that actually makes us stronger.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all for those comments and more importantly, some of those early insights as well. Tori, I'd like to kick off one of my questions with you as we engage the panel. And in looking at Way to Win's work, I know you're guided by a theory of change. And I love the 6 signals, right? We look at 6 signals that guide our work as to whether we're creating change or not. And so if you think about those and you think particularly about your signal around base turnout, increasing the base, and you think about November 2020 and what we've all shared here today as the initial part of the conversation, how would you say that signal's doing right now? And is it different than say other inflection points in the early 90s or whatnot?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll give you something that's given me hope and something that's freaking me out at night, something that keeps me up at night. So like I just said, I think flipping a switch about wanting to get engaged, wanting your voice heard, you're going to find every mechanism possible to have that expression come forward. And so I think that the fact that on Monday we had the President of the United States flirt with martial law and engage in putting military in the streets of the United States of America against First Amendment protected activity. And I panicked Monday night. I couldn't sleep Monday night. I was so panicked. And the next day, I mean, it reminds me, I lived in Mexico during the times of the drug war. It reminded me of a time when you don't know the good guys from the bad guys. The military is just out in the street. It really, really caused a fair amount of alarm. The next day, when I saw communities continue to go out, yesterday, it was Tuesday, it was a day to vote. People were out in the streets, people were out voting. Stephanie can tell you, she waited until 2:30 in the morning, 12:30 in the morning to get her ballot cast in Washington, D.C. It didn't stop people. And so that gives me hope. The masses know better. We as an electorate, we as a democracy in this country know better, and we are continuing to move forward. Now, what gives me a little bit of fear, of course, because we shouldn't just walk into this election feeling like, everybody who's going to vote will, is that we have to give people the reason why. Arturo said it. I've been studying the Texas electorate for a very long time, building out a new base in Texas and to make it a reflective democracy. And we heard that all the time too, that voting doesn't matter, it doesn't change my life. We have got to show our leadership, our progressive leadership has got to show actual policy recommendations right now to make people's lives better. It's not just police, it's not just policing that's killing folks in this country, it's COVID too. And so we need people right now with real solutions, making them plain so that people realize, oh, my government really does matter. I need to show up on election day. So those are the reflections I have as we head into November.
Great, thank you for that. Stephanie, you know, over to you. Obviously, the question when we start thinking about this, and that Tori was able to frame right now, the good opportunities and the challenges, where does the Latinx electorate factor in? And in the work you're doing at X Labs, where do you see where there's an opportunity to really influence those outcomes, and in solidarity with our Black communities and other communities of color, where Latinx will have a role to play in sort of determining the outcome of the election?
Yeah. I'm going to invite Eno to share his screen here so I can run through just a couple very quick slides just for emphasis here. I want to reiterate a point that I think Tori made, which, you know, participation does not equal power. Electoral participation does not equal power. And I think one of the challenges that we will face this year and will continue to face is and Arturo alluded to this as well, the kind of disenchantment about the system in general, and that people feeling like casting their votes doesn't amount to change in their life, it doesn't amount to change in their community. And so again, hopefully we will have very large scale turnout. I waited 2.5 hours in line to vote yesterday in Washington, DC for like literally a zero controversial like ballot. And so people are energized and high on wanting to participate and engage, whether that's in the streets or at the ballot box. So hopefully we can keep that high. This slide is just really quickly to show the power of the Latino vote, obviously in places like Arizona, which is a state that a lot of people are talking about right now, where Latinos will play a disproportionate role in 2020. But I also point out to Michigan and Wisconsin. This slide basically illustrates the margin of victory between Trump and Clinton in 2016, and the number of Latinos that either sat out the election because they were registered and they didn't vote, they were eligible but didn't register, or they voted for a third party. And I think this just really shows the power of the Latino electorate in all of the states that will matter to any kind of path to victory. So go to the next slide, please, quickly. But the challenge really is we're not seeing the same levels of motivation and excitement among our community at this point. Latinas, one of the major findings from our research so far over the last year, we've done close to 35,000 interviews with Latinos in 11 states, surveying on a number of different issues and areas and tracking sentiment over time longitudinally. Latinas are very disapproving of the actions of this president and the administration. They're especially critical on his moral failings and his handling of immigration, children in cages, and family separation. But what we're also seeing is the levels of excitement are not where they should be. And so that is something that we really need to do, especially as we look at women who can play, and Latino women and Black women can play a really critical role in the upcoming election. If we hit to the next slide very quickly. But we know Latinas do not turn out at the same levels as white and Black women. And there are a lot of reasons for that. One is juggling multiple jobs or tasks, childcare, elder care. But in addition to that, I think there's a huge hurdle that folks have researched around not feeling prepared enough to vote and not wanting to mess up. And so there's a whole lane of work that I think can be done to help Latinas feel more prepared to be able to vote. I actually think this is where vote by mail can present unique opportunities where they can take their time and vote at their own pace and at home on their own terms. Next slide. And the last thing I would just say is the role, again, that Latinas specifically can play in a number of different states across the country. Latinas, both young women, younger women, and younger and older women combined, make up the majority or a very large share of the electorate, the Latino electorate, in many critical states in 2020. And so if we go to the next slide for this last one here, I think we need to help create a self-fulfilling prophecy about the role that Latinas, women of color, Black women can play in this election, and actually being the deciders and helping to drive election outcomes. Because as Bernard Fraga, who many of us follow his work, and this is from the Turnout Gap, when a group is perceived to drive election outcomes, members of that group are more likely to turn out and vote. And so I think there is a huge lane for us to create that self-fulfilling prophecy among women of color and Latinas specifically.
Thank you for that, Stephanie, and definitely appreciate the visuals. Always brings more more impact. So thanks for putting that together. Arturo, you know, as we're talking a lot about where the electorate is, the opportunities, and, you know, it's Stephanie just mentioned the idea of self-fulfilling prophecy and the perceptions of a group to be able to impact outcomes. Thinking about the past year and with Census being an early exercise, can you speak a little bit to Naleo's read on where is the momentum and energy around Latino civic engagement right now? Are we seeing it building? Is 2020 Census a good indicator and some good lessons learned that we could be projecting out into as we pivot into the election moment?
Well, actually, I would go back a year and a half to the 2018 election, where we saw Latino turnout that was beyond what we'd expect in a midterm congressional election. It approached more the performance of the electorate in a presidential election. So I think in 2018, we saw what we saw in 2010 among the Latino electorate. And if you remember this, we had a study of Latino voter engagement, and we said that at the time, the Latino electorate was riled, restless, and ready to vote. Coming out of 18, I think that's exactly where the Latino vote was. But I think there have been some significant developments over 2019 and the first part of 2020 that suggest that we may have more challenges than we think in terms of tapping into that excitement and motivation that should be there. First, on the census experience, we have invested more than I've seen in any other census, and this is my fourth, in educating and motivating the American public overall, and Latinos in particular, to participate in the census and fill out their census forms. And indeed, for the past 11 weeks, many of us have been at home and we've been trying to get folks to respond by paper, online, by phone, and our rates are not where they should be. And I think this goes back to still having to make the connection of how participating in the census is connected to outcomes in your life. That's a connection we need to do with voting as well. This census has been completely disrupted by COVID-19. Our elections are going to be similarly disrupted by COVID-19. And my plea to the philanthropists who are listening is, if you're going to invest in elections, the investment needs to happen now in advocacy, because we need to make sure that election officials at the county and state levels are preparing themselves to run elections in a way that does not make it more inaccessible for Latinos to vote. You know, today, the governor of California issued an executive order that there must be a polling location for every 10,000 voters in the state of California, in addition to mailing every registered voter a vote by mail ballot. That's the kind of actions we need in the 49 other states. The other thing we need in California is a public education campaign. What do you do with that vote by mail ballot when it comes into your household? Latinos do not vote by mail at the same rates as non-Latinos. And I will tell you, in my own experience, I'm a vote by mail voter. It's not intuitive how to actually mark that ballot, put it in the right envelope, sign appropriately at the right place. It's not an easy process. The census is a lot easier. And I think that's a dry run for the kind of public education campaign we're going to need to insist upon now. And it has to be publicly funded. There's no way philanthropy is going to fund the public education campaign needed to make sure that Latinos are not disenfranchised by the kinds of voting procedures that are going to be put in place to make voting more safe and secure in November 2020.
Thank you for that. And I want to invite the other panelists to share any thoughts around the moment and adjustments that COVID-19 is going to bring to the election. Arturo previewed some of those. And I know that's happening across the country, not just in California. How those policies and what's available will be very different state by state. But before that, Leticia, Arturo mentioned the role of philanthropy. You mentioned it early in your comments. And I know oftentimes in philanthropy, the minute sort of advocacy or power is in the conversation, sort of the way we respond and move is different. What do you see different maybe in philanthropy where we might be at a good juncture that there's quick response and adaptability?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. I am, so, so I'll admit, right, that the Nathan Cummings Foundation, we're part of like, and I know you are too, right? We're part of like the social justice philanthropy community. And so from our perspective, funding advocacy and funding movement building is what we do, right? And so I think what I encourage the philanthropic community that's listening is to join the social justice, progressive philanthropy. If that's not where you are in the continuum of social justice, please join us. I'm happy to help you think about why that works. But I also think about the sort of deeper question that we started with, which is, and actually Arturo raised as well, and what's the role of philanthropy, right? Of institutional philanthropy in helping to build power in the communities that have been historically disenfranchised. And so this idea that we're about to head into an election, right? And it's now that we fund the education, and that now that we fund the work around Latina women, is actually part of the broader systemic issue that philanthropy can have a really big role in undoing. And so I would encourage us to think a little bit about what is it that we're trying to do here? Is it that we're trying to elect a democratic person to office? Or is it that we're trying to transform systems of oppression, right? Because if what we're trying to do is elect a democratic person, I mean, I guess that's good. It's for sure better than not. But I would encourage us to think about, like, what is it that we're trying to do here from a philanthropic perspective, from a public perspective as well, right? So if what we're trying to do is transform systems of oppression, actually engaging the Latina women that Stephanie was talking about should not happen every 4 years, but should be part of a broader strategy to get Latinas engaged the way that Tori talked about, but also to really begin to undo, right, the systems of oppression that we're all living in at the moment, and that the uprisings are showing us. So, I encourage the Hispanics in philanthropy. I encourage the fellow, philanthropic staff and presidents and others to really join us in the conversation of what is it that we're trying to do. And I'll just say quickly that in this COVID moment, and people that have, my team that's on, I see them, I see them, texting and tweeting, they'll know that I'm not a big fan from a philanthropic perspective of moving all of our money into disaster relief, right? Especially when that money comes out of portfolios in philanthropy that have been named movement building, right? So it's important to give money in the moment of COVID, for sure. And it's also important for us to think about that what COVID unveils is systemic oppression, right? It's no es un accidente, right? It's not an accident that the people that are suffering the most are Black and brown folks. And that is a result of our collective inability to pull back the veil of what systemic oppression looks like, right, in the moment. So I would encourage us to have a conversation, to continue to have the conversation of what will it take for philanthropy to engage, not just because we want to dethrone Trump, but because engaging in transformational and courageous change to undo systemic oppression requires us to do what Tori, Stephanie, and Arturo were just saying, and that's long-term engagement and advocacy and movement building.
Great, thanks, Leticia. And I would submit to our philanthropic colleagues that just as we've evolved a narrative that describes COVID as the new normal, maybe what we can adopt is saying that social justice philanthropy can be our new normal in response to COVID-19, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's beautiful. And thanks for addressing that, because Arturo did uplift it and you did a great job of kind of pushing on that. So, if you're listening and following the conversation, I encourage you to begin to submit questions in chat. We're gonna soon, in a few minutes, move to asking panelists to respond to some of your questions. So please encourage you to do so. HIP staff is reviewing those and will be submitting them in. But as we wait for some of those questions to come in, I want to invite Tori, Stephanie, if you can share a little bit about, Arturo mentioned the changes that are coming to how elections will look. You've experienced them, Stephanie. So if you wanted to share on that, and also to the rest of the panel, you know, beyond our focus on the White House that many folks have and is their motivation, if things go well and we do turn out, what are some of the other impacts that we should expect to see? So I want to open it up first with you, Tori, and then Stephanie.
Well, first, let me lift up Leticia's leadership, because we've been working together on a project for the last couple of months, few months, maybe a year now, that I definitely want to give voice to. So way to win. I mean, the name's in the game. We want to win. We want to build power for not just Latinos, but all multiracial coalitions that are really emerging and rising in this country in this new era. And we believe in elections. You know, we believe in the power of the vote as a tool for changing this country. Invested $74 million into the concept and into the role of multiracial coalitions to grab their power. And Leticia is one of the few that has challenged me. And she said, Tori, that's awesome. We're proud of you. But we got to take a step back and unpack this culture and the behavior. Like what can we do beyond just getting folks to vote, even though that's a very important piece of it. And so I reached out to a colleague, Ian Hanny Lopez, who is the author of Dog Whistle Politics. He's a lawyer and race scholar who works at the Berkeley School of Law, and asked him, when was there a time where we've seen Latino power be the most acute? And again, he mentioned to me, it's when Black power is the most robust. And there is a reason for that. There's a reason that when we are all engaged in each other's movements, we're actually more powerful. And I was thinking a little bit about, you know, we have to look at history right now. We're repeating it. It's like a cycle. This is 1968, this is 1982. In some ways, this is 1882 with the, you know, backlash against immigrants. And so looking at history, we know, you know, we won things like better conditions in Delano, California during the great boycotts because we worked with Filipino workers and we, you know, made moral appeals to white consumers. And it's in that multiracial power building that we have strength. And so the core concept of the work that Leticia and I have been doing together and Stephanie is housing at Equis Labs is that we actually have to figure out how to use race as a tool, that the right knows how to use race as a tool to divide us. So we have to figure out how to use race as a tool to unite us in a way to actively confront the division of hate that's on us right now. And if we can do that, then we can win anything. And so there's a framework that Ian has developed with Anat Shankar Osario called the race class narrative. And it's actually sort of a set of magic words that when put together create this sort of race as a community. It's a formula to build community across racial lines. And so Ian and I were thinking about it. It was like, what if we tried to first test if that race class narrative, if those magic words work within the Latinx community, which we know is a community of communities with, you know, multi-ethnic, multiracial, multinational, multilingual identities. What if we figured out if there's a set of magic words that work in that framework too, that helps us build this coalition? And so over the course of the last several weeks, we've been in focus groups with a number of Latino communities across this country, just all kinds of focus groups, over a dozen focus groups in cities in diverse states. And we are partnering with Equis to distribute the findings, partnering with our grantees. We've got 80 grantees in more than 20 states who are going to implement some of this specific Latinx race class narrative work. And I think to get to the point of the COVID too, to make this link, you know, we're in a moment where traditional tactics aren't going to work anymore. We're not going to send people on doors. There's not going to be a ton of door knocking in the fall, which is a traditional tool we use to get out the vote. And so we have to get smart about the narrative frameworks we're using on diversified digital channels that we have. I mean, the good news is, you know, our media landscape is far more democratic. The bad news is there's a lot of noise and we got to cut through. And so we're looking to really figure out how we can cut through in this big, bold, beautiful, multiracial message.
May I just add one point on that?
Yeah, please, Arturo, go ahead.
What we learned from the census is that social media is not reaching the most disenfranchised. Not everybody's on Facebook, not everybody's on Instagram, not everybody's on Twitter. And the fact that we will not have the traditional door-to-door outreach strategies at our disposal means that our reliance on traditional broadcast media, television and radio, is going to be even more critical in this election cycle.
100%.
Stephanie.
And plus one to what Tori just said, we are housing this project. We're very excited to get these findings out into the field. I'll just wrap by saying, kind of take it a little bit more narrow into some very tactical challenges that I think we are facing. As Arturo mentioned, low information voters get a lot of their information from Univision and Telemundo and from broadcast media, broadcast radio, and those are critical mediums for us to continue to distribute and disseminate information. I think because of the challenge that we are in now, site-based voter registration is potentially going to be very limited, if not virtually non-existent. And so how do we explore new approaches into looking at online voter registration to expand the pie and expand the electorate? Two is vote by mail. We know that traditionally Latinos have not used vote by mail as at high rates as other parts of the population, the electorate. And so what is it that we can do to create more comfort level around the process for vote by mail? And then the third, if Eno can just share this quick slide, pre-COVID, post-COVID, this is going to be a huge challenge for us, but the challenge around disinformation. And if we can go to slide 9, please, the disinformation slide. Essentially we've got a lot of disinformation that is circulating. There was a lot around the census. We just recently did a landscape analysis about the challenges that disinformation presents because we know whether it's homegrown disinformation or stuff being propagated by foreign adversaries. There is stuff that will continue to tap into the fear and create voter suppression, a suppression effect with our community that we need to be careful. I pull this up because this was a piece of disinformation from 2016. This is a doctored image. This did not really happen, but was circulating virally and was supported by kind of outside influences targeting Latino voters. So this is the kind of stuff we'll continue to see.
So in the last minute, I was hoping, it's always great conversation and hard to get at everything, but I feel like I do have to mention to your closing point, Stephanie, the importance that we should uplift and didn't touch on voter protection related to voter information, right? And the need that beyond the turnout, beyond education, the motivation, that things like the Naleo hotline, 888-VEI-VOTA, will play crucial roles with our media partners in making sure that the misinformation doesn't lead to disenfranchisement. I want to share with you all, I know we didn't have a lot of questions from audience. I think people were appreciating your comments and we quickly ran out of time, but do want to just close with a thank you, not from me or the staff, but from one of our participants who said, Fran Rodriguez said, thank you to each panelist and moderator. This was the most powerful workshop for me today. I feel so empowered by your words of wisdom. Mil gracias. So with that, to echo Fran, mil gracias to all of you. Thank you so much and hope that this is just the beginning of a conversation that will keep going. Adios, much appreciated. Thank you.
All right, are we ready? Ready.
All right. Are we still live?
Guys, that works so well.
Yes, we're still live. Sharon, are you able to, I think I can stop.